seat, so I'm sitting down.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
It is recording.
Good. All right. Well, I brought a topic today if you're interested in it.
Of course I am. Kat, this is your time. Give it to us.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to talk today about herbal medicine as a part of root doctoring. You know, in modern times, people have thought of root doctoring as being the performance of magic spells or the idea of African American spell casting and folk magic. But going back, not even so long ago, even in the late 20th century, and among some people today, the word root doctor meant a doctor. It wasn't like an honorific title. It really meant somebody who could do medical work on you with roots and herbs. So what I like to talk about is how, as everybody in the world, not just Black people, got more urban, they forgot about herb medicine. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I want to take us back in time to the very first Black root doctor who I know to have done both herbal medicine and herbal magic. Now, I'm sure there were people before him, but none of them were accredited as medicinal doctors until he was. And his name was Dr. E.P. Reed.
E.P. Reed.
E.P. Reed, Dr. Edward Parker Reed. And he was a person who was grew up in Virginia. And he was born in 1868, just after the Civil War had ended. So he was born into freedom, not slavery. And by 1889, he had become the first person of color to own and operate a drugstore. And this was in Petersburg, Virginia. And he decided to leave the South because it just was the segregation and it was just not so good for him. So he moved to Philadelphia, which was run by the Quakers and was the city of brotherly love and was considered to be far less segregated than Petersburg, Virginia. And so by 1890, a year later, he opened up the first Black-owned drugstore in Philadelphia, which also happened to be the second Black-owned drugstore in America. And he was a businessman, and he began to manufacture and sell herbal remedies. And these were all types of things that were, everything from tooth powder to brush your teeth with, to douche powder to keep your nether parts clean, to keep you clean, right? And he had cough syrups, he had all of the things that were made at the time with herbs and roots, and he was very good at it. He was known throughout the nation. People sent to him for herbal remedies. I happen to have a collection of all of the, not all, but many, many hundreds of letters that were sent to him by people saying, well, I have a weakness in my joints or my back hurts. What should I have? And he would answer the letters. I don't have his answers, but I have the date that he answered. He'd say answered, 1920, April 14th, 1921. And he'd then send them an answer. He'd prescribe herbs for them. And people were very much connected to him. He was connected to the community as a prescribing herb doctor. But he also was an astrologer. He also prescribed magical things and made them. He made Hindu jinx chaser incense, for instance. He sold regular herbs and roots for medicine, like peppermint, which was good for an upset stomach, but he sold John the Conqueror roots, which are used for power and luck in gambling. He also had a spring. He never lost his connection to Virginia, and he bought a mineral spring in Virginia. There's a lot of these mineral springs in Virginia that have, various minerals that'll do various good for you. And he bought one, and it was the only mineral spring in Virginia where Black people could go and drink the mineral water, because all the other ones were white, segregated whites only, right? But because a lot of people said, oh, listen, I like the mineral spring, but I'm not so sure about going to Virginia, he then began to bottle the water and dehydrate it. He actually put up a dehydrating plant, and it reduced it to crystals. And he would tell you, take a teaspoonful of the crystals, put it into your own water, and you'll have the equivalent of the mineral water from this spring, a Virginia Medical Mineral Springs. So he sold that, and it came in little paper envelopes, and it would tell you all about it. And it was called Your Drink to Health. And meanwhile, he also started an insurance company, and a burial society, where you could buy burial insurance. And all of this was done to promote the Black community in Philadelphia and around the nation. He also put out one of these books. Nowadays, people call them green books because one of them was the green book, but he put out a directory of Black-owned businesses all around the country called the National Afro-American Encyclopedia, so that you could drive safely from one place to another during segregation, find a hotel that would take you in, find a gas station that would sell you gas. And it also listed every Black church, every Black business, hotel, fraternal organization, school, college, professional organization, and a list of every Black court clerk, pastor, or school superintendent in America. So you had a phone number you could call if you needed help while you were traveling. And he himself had been, a justice of the peace back in the days before Jim Crow got involved. The Jim Crow laws really started primarily after World War I. There was so much progress being made, and there was a lot of kickback after World War I. But he was a justice of the peace in what would now be called small claims court. So this was E.P. Reed, and he was responsible for keeping alive herbal magic and herbal medicine up until his death in 1940. He died at the age of 72. And I just wanted to tell everybody about him. When people talk about hoodoo, they think, oh yes, I'm going to get me some, reversing oil or some crown of success oil. Yeah, he made those things, but he also would get you the herbs that you needed for your good health, like slippery elm bark for your throat, which I should have some right now, or to get you some, ironweed root, which would be used to allow you to sweat a little bit if you needed to sweat. Or maybe he would get you some marshmallow root, which is to soothe your bowels if you had a bowel upset.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's who he was, Dr. E.P. Reed. Now, there is an article I wrote about him at the Association of Independent Readers and Root Workers, and that's available to the public. It's at readersandrootworkers.org. And if you go there, it's .org/wiki/Dr_E_P_Reed. But you can just look it up at Google. Look up Dr. E.P. Reed, Association of Independent Readers and Root Workers. You'll see a short article. Now, I've also written a much longer article about him, and I've given it to my Patreon supporters. And this will be released to the public in 1 year. My Patreon articles are held for my Patreon supporters. They pay $2 a week to get 1 year advance articles.
Yeah.
So, I believe
I'm one.
You're a Patreon supporter, and thank you. So I don't know if you've looked at that other page, and there's all these pictures of his stuff and the things he published, the labels, the art, the texts he wrote. He was also a friend of the philosopher and socialist W.E.B. Du Bois, African-American activist. And W.E.B. Du Bois and his communicated, and they were, that got Dr. E.P. Reed to publish something called The Watchman, The Light of Civilization, The Leverage of Wealth, which was a pamphlet dedicated to the 50th anniversary of Negro freedom in America. And this pamphlet was about how Black people ought to start their own businesses because white people weren't going to do it for them. And white people were going to keep them as employees only, that they had, support Black businesses, get your own thing on, and we can be successful. And when we are successful, the leverage of wealth, when we are successful, they will have to give us equality because wealth will equal equality. It was a very interesting social program he promoted. But he is the father, grandfather, great-grandfather of a whole movement of Black-owned medical groups, stores and people now on Facebook that want to talk about the old ways of doing things. Now, there are also white herbalists, and I'm going to tell you, some of them were good, and they were friends with Dr. E.P. Reed. This is the interesting thing. The largest herbal company in America was founded by a guy named Joseph E. Meyer, back in 1918. It was called Indiana Botanic Gardens. And he and his son, Clarence Meyer, and his grandson, David Meyer, who's still alive, who's a little bit older than me, they kept on with this medicinal herb company, despite the government coming down and saying, thou shalt not sell herbs. And they supplied E.P. Reed with his herbs. He also bought from a couple of other herbal companies, Penn Herb, because I know this because I have the old invoices and purchase orders, right? Because I got his papers.
Wow.
So I'm a collector of obscure things. So The Herbalist you can still find copies of it. The Herbalist by Joseph E. Meyer. I'm looking at a copy, says revised and enlarged by Clarence Meyer, that's his son, and Clarence Meyer did the art. So this is a book that everybody should have, whether they do folk magic or folk medicine. Everybody must have this book. The Herbalist is published by Meyer Books, which is David Meyer's company. And you can find it at Amazon. You can find used copies of it pretty cheap. Find a used copy. If you like it, you'll want to get a nicer edition. It comes with color illustrations. There's nothing quite like it. And this came out first in 1918, although as it was revised, it got bigger and bigger. And Clarence Meyer was responsible for the Herbalist Almanac, which was a yearly thing where people wrote in with what their herbal remedies were. And Clarence Meyer has written a bunch of books, and he's passed, but I'm going to tell you what some of them are. Vegetarian medicines. Now, this is interesting from the standpoint that there are no animal parts in these. These are strictly vegetarian. So these are, they use fruits and foods as medicine. Vegetarian medicines, good book. Vegetarian Medicines by Clarence Meyer, Meyer. You can find it used. My used copy is marked $1, and it's in perfect condition. And it's a very good book, and it really is about using food for the flu, for colds, for diuretics, for anything you need, for kidney and bladder. These are foods that you might use rather than having to go get a medicine.
Yeah, because I used a concoction that I made of food to actually cure puppies of parvo. I didn't know that's what they had, but I knew they were sick and dying. And I put together, vitamin E, vitamin A. Mustard greens has the highest source of vitamin A that you can get naturally, and menudo. And in 2 days, they were cured.
That's
Saved
right.
a $1,800 bet.
Well, that's the thing. What I always say, it's worth trying. And sometimes you'll get something so remarkable, and then you want to pass it on to other people. And that's what Clarence Meyer, the son of Joseph Meyer, he wrote a book called American Folk Medicine, Home Remedies from Nature Commonly Used for over 250 years. This is a big book. It's also still available. You can find used copies or, newer copies on Amazon. There's a hardcover version, there's a paperback version, and this is a book I've had for years. I don't know, when did it first come out? Let's see. Came out
How
when I
about
was much younger than I am now. Came out in 1973, and it's just as good as it ever was. It has herbs for fevers, herbs for coughs. But what makes this different than one of these modern books that you can go get? Oh, I'm going to go get some modern herb book. It's going to be better because it's modern.
no?
This is this is the collection that Clarence Meyer made starting around 1920 or so. He started working for his father. Father started the herb company in 1918. By 1925, Clarence was working for him full time. So this was Clarence's 50 years worth of experience with older remedies. And it's an amazing book, illustrated, a cover, but not illustrated inside like the herbalist is. The herbalist is also illustrated by Clarence. And there's two other ones I want to recommend. Another one is called Herbal Recipes. Now, this is a pamphlet. This is a little harder to find. It's a pamphlet called Herbal Recipes for Hair, Salves and Liniments, Medicinal Wines and Vinegars, and Plant Ash Uses. So these are home pharmacy remedies. And this came out in 78, and it's copyright by David Meyer. And it's David and Clarence working together with, different things. And maybe that David wrote this one, the grandson. But this is so interesting because it has how to use wild plants to do coloring and rinse colors for your hair, how to make, fixing and setting the hair with quince seeds, but you didn't know that quince seeds were used for that. How to use rosemary for your hair, how to make a pomade to make your hair have a straighter appearance, gives recipes for it. All these things you can do at home with herbs. There's also salves and liniments for muscle sprains and stuff, and medicinal wines, which a lot of people like to make because it's an alcoholic tincture, but you don't have to pay all the big money for the tincture. You make it yourself with wine. So this book is called Herbal Recipes by David Meyer. And again, published by Meyer Books. Fantastic. And the last one I'm going to recommend, and then I'll shut up, is Sachets, Potpourri, and Incense Recipes, etc. And this is by Clarence Meyer. And this one is how to make fragrant insect repellents, how to make fragrant sachets for, a body powder for putting into your linen cabinet to fragrance your linens, how to make potpourris, how to make herb-scented pillows, how to make incense. It's all here. It's all here. A small book. These books are brief, these little ones, these last two, Herbal Recipes and Sachets, Potpourri. 48-page book, and it's just chock full of recipes. And I look at these things and I think, well, people want to know how to do this stuff, but the sources of how to do it are just not available. And now I've given you some good stuff.
Not only is it not available, but then you have to figure out where you can actually get the herbs.
Well, that's true. That's true. Well,
That is the thing, because you can have all the books in the world, but
yeah,
if you don't have access to the real herbs that they're talking about.
That's for sure. Well, I'll give a little promotion for myself. That's why I founded my company.
Yeah,
I founded my company because I was interested in folk magic. And uh, there was a large company, I'm not going to name them because there's no point in shaming them, but they were a company I had bought my magical herbs from. I bought my medical herbs from Indiana Botanic Garden, a company that was founded by the Meyer family. But two things happened, very close succession. Number one, the magical company, which was big nationwide company, began sending fake herbs. I mean, when I say fake, they were,
yeah,
I had ordered a root and they sent me some chopped up bark. It was
yep,
landscaper's fir bark. And I was like, come on, really?
yeah.
I mean, I know it wasn't a root. And I called them up and they said, oh, this is the new root. And I'm like, you're kidding, you know? So that was number one. I wanted to sell magical herbs. Number two, Indiana Botanic Gardens, which had originally been a big garden, and I mean, it was huge, and they grew herbs, and they also contracted with local people in Indiana and Illinois, and also all around the South, depending on what the herbs were. And they also imported herbs from South America, from Asia, and India, and so forth. They decided to make a choice, which was their choice. After the next generation, after David's generation, they decided to sell supplements and capsules, powders. In
Yeah,
those became popular in the 90s, and they stopped selling raw bulk herbs. And
yeah.
at that point, I decided I was going to be selling raw bulk herbs, always acknowledging my debt to them. I never would have done it. I never would have competed with them because they were the best, but I decided to do it. I wrote a book called HooDoo Herb and Root Magic. This is my best-selling book, and this book came out in 2002, so that's right around when this happened, and 20 years ago. And I gave all the magical uses that I knew for roots and herbs as prescribed in conjure, hoodoo, African American folk magic, whatever you want to call that. Then I put out a book called This Amazing Book, HooDoo Herb and Root Medicine. And this was a little book. And this book came out in 2017. And it's just a list of the same kinds of herbs, but it gives what their medical uses are. I couldn't reprint any of the Meyer books, so I put out this, and it actually is a reprint of a book from 1947 called This Amazing Book Opens the Door to Better Health. And I added a little bit to it, and I added a dictionary of what the different names for diseases were back in 1940s and 1890s versus now, because the same diseases had different names. So this is in a little educational book, and all of these herbs I sell. No, not all. I would see one of them is corn silk. I do not sell corn silk. You got to get that off your own corn plant. Some of them are rare now. Some of them are endangered species, and I can't sell them. But all the other ones of them I do sell. Sage, I sell sassafras, sarsaparilla. I'm just looking at them here,
Well, Kat, if they say it's an endangered species, well, why don't they sell the seeds so people can plant them and make them not an endangered?
That's a very good question, and I'll give you two answers. Number one is some plants don't reproduce quickly from seed. They may only reproduce from root. And I'm going to give you an example, Adam and Eve root. It doesn't reproduce from seed. It reproduces by the root multiplying. But the way it's used is you want both the old last year's root, which is sort of wrinkly and hollow, and you want the new root, which is big and smooth. The wrinkly one is the lady root, that's the Eve, and the new root is Adam. So you want both roots to use it as Adam and Eve roots used in a love charm. Well, if you take both roots, you've killed the plant.
Oh,
So how are you going to do that? You can let it grow, feed it, really overfeed it, hope it makes Adam and Eve and the baby, take away Adam and Eve and keep the baby, but that doesn't always happen. So just using it kills it. And so that's a rare root. It's just the way it is. Another reason a root might be endangered or a plant might be endangered is it has a very limited range of growth. It may grow only in a very acidic marsh where the water is sour or musty. It may grow only on a high desert in a place far, far away, like Rose of Jericho. And you cannot grow it in your garden because it needs to be on this high desert plain. So it's endangered because everyone wants the Rose of Jericho. People who live over where the Rose of Jericho grows, they might be very poor people. And they're convinced that if they go get one and they get paid 2 cents for every one they find in the wild, and they just go out with big old tow sacks and they just fill up those tow sacks and they take them all because they got $2 for a day's worth of work. And then they show up in the wholesale market, they go for a quarter, then they're doubled when they get into been graded, they get 50 cents each. Then they come to America, the distributor passes them over at $2 because everyone doubles their money, right? And eventually you go to a HooDoo shop or a Botanica, and there these little plants are dried whole, and you might see them for $4 to $8, $10, whatever it's going to be. But meanwhile, they're all gone back where they used to live, and there's no more. So endangered species, 2 reasons. One is that you kill the plant in using it, so you have to only take, the way the Native Americans explained it, and they always explain it the same way. Every Native American teacher I've ever seen in person, read a book by, or seen on YouTube, any place, they'll always tell you, in my tribe, we were told, take 1/4 of the plants. And I was taught that also by my mother. I was taught that by other botanists. Never take more than 1/4 of the plants. But that's on the assumption that you are the only person taking plants, right? If tomorrow Joe Blow comes and takes 1/4 of what's left, and the next guy takes 1/4 of what's left, it'll still end up endangered. So we always keep our little wild spaces private. We don't tell other people where we're going to go get our mushrooms or whatever. And some people told me something even better. Take 1/4 of the plants, but only from the central cluster. If there are plants at the outside edges, don't take any of them, because the plant is trying to spread and cover more territory because it knows it's being eaten out at the center, right?
Good.
So always be responsible in harvesting. So now what Joseph Meyer did, this was the brilliance of Joseph Meyer. He realized ginseng, very popular plant. Ginseng root is used for male sexuality. It's used for energy for everybody. You know the plant I'm talking about, right? American ginseng. It was so popular that it was imported to China. Now imagine that. We import a lot of herbs from China, but they imported American. They want American ginseng. Well, American ginseng only grows in the forests, and it grows under the shade of other trees, and it takes 7 years for the root to develop to a size that you can harvest it and have a nice ginseng root. And it grows from seeds, but you have to wait until after the seeds have matured. You shake the head down onto the ground to make the seeds grow, and then you cut the root, right? You have to do that because if you harvest it before the seeds are ready, you've killed the plant's future, right? So Joseph Meyer studied this, and he said, wild ginseng brings this great amount of money. Now, people were trying to grow ginseng in a lath house, which is like a greenhouse, but instead of having a cover over, it just has strips of cheap lumber with a little space for sun to get in. So it was partially shaded like it was under trees, and they were growing ginseng in lath houses. But when they did that, they would do a chemical analysis of the roots, and it didn't have the same minerals. It didn't have the same plant auxins and hormones, and it didn't have the same ingredients in it that the wild ginger did. Something about growing in the wild made it stronger, better, did more to the body than lath house grown ginseng. So what Mr. Meyer came up with was, he came up with using a plow horse and going through the woods and letting the horse use the plow, but it would skip. You know what? I could hit a root and the plow would skip. It didn't make a furrow. And he just run random through these with the horse through the woods. And as the plow hit and skipped, he would break off some of those seeds and plant them. So he planted wild ginseng in the woods. And that's how he made his fortune. And but he was the one who said, you know, wild plants, because they struggled in the wild, they're more concentrated. The goodness is in them. So he was known for his fantastic ginseng. And then he began planting gardens. He called them botanic gardens. They weren't like a vegetable garden in rows, though some of them were. Some of the plants would grow outdoors in a row, but some of them he would grow in hedges. They wanted to grow in a hedge, he'd set up a hedge and he'd put them in with their companion plant. If they wanted to grow in the shade, he'd put them in the shade. And so he became a student of how to take wild plants and give them concentrated growth in a certain area, but they would still be wild. And a novel was written about him called The Harvester. A woman named Jean Stratton Porter wrote that novel describing his methods. So, yeah, when you ask about a plant, is it, when you buy an herb, is it good or is it just cheaply grown? Some plants can stand to be grown in rows just fine. Peppermint, you can just grow rows and rows, acres and acres and acres of peppermint, no problem. You can harvest it with a machine if you want to, with a tractor, whatever you want. Peppermint will adapt. And rosemary is another, will adapt. But there are plants that are shy growers or shy seeders, and they don't reseed well or they don't multiply well. And those are the hard ones to get. And you have to think about them, what you're doing. Try to buy your herbs from a responsible place. Make sure if you can, not always can you, but make sure if you can, ask, are these organically grown? And were they, when they were harvested from the wild, or were they grown in a semi-wild condition? Were they responsibly harvested? That's important.
As if you get you have to have a trusted source, you know,
Yeah,
because people will tell you anything to sell.
that's right.
And so I would trust your compound, your herbs more than anybody else because
Well,
I
thank you. But thank you. That's nice to know. I'll tell you, in that book, HooDoo Root Magic, I witnessed something else, which was I went to a very large retail and wholesale hoodoo shop, and also a Latin America botanica. It was like part Latin America botanica with Caribbean herbs, Mexican herbs, and then also magic, and then also African American. It was like a big mix. It was like a big building. This man owned an entire building. And he took me in back. He's a very friendly man. He took me in back. And there was two things I witnessed that just blew my mind. One of them was an undocumented Honduran immigrant. And he told me the man is an undocumented Honduran immigrant, and his name was whatever, he call him Jose, whatever. And this man had a little balance beam scale, like you would use for weighing out any kind of powder or something like that. And he would have little Ziploc bags, and it was like he could have been putting, cocaine in a bag or heroin or
right.
something. It was a little bag, a little tiny bag. It wasn't like the way we do it. And he
Right.
said, this is where we put the magic in. It was just blue powder. And I sniffed it. It smelled like a cheap perfume. And it was just blue powder. And he had a little bin of it. And he was like putting it in, weighing it into these little baggies. And that was it. It was going to be whatever it was going to be. It was going to be blue powder. And it was just this man who didn't speak English, didn't know what he was doing, just had learned how to weigh this stuff like it was a job. And so that blue powder was going to become tranquility powder, peaceful home powder. It was going to be anything that was blue, clarity powder, blessing powder, anything blue, that was going to be that powder. It was all going to be the same, right? Then he took me back a little farther into the back, and he had these wooden bins, and they were very beautiful wooden bins. And I was quite impressed with them. They were very tall, and they were at a sort of they were done with a slant, so you could throw in 1 to 5 pound bags of herbs, the way they come from the distributors, maybe in a 10-pound bag of herbs. And these big, big, big bins, and they were in the front of the bin, there was a little lip, and there was loose herbs. And he said, this is where we make green for green and brown for brown. And I said, what do you mean? And he showed me that a bin of 5-finger grass, which is a green leafy herb that's hard to get and it's not cheap, but it's used for success. And he goes, look, 5-finger grass is empty. And then he walked over and he goes, here's catnip. And catnip does look a little bit like 5-finger grass, smells different. Catnip is an entirely different plant. It's in the mint family. five-finger grasses in the rose family. I mean, they really are very different. But, you know, he grabbed a 5-pound bag of catnip, ripped it open, and dumped it into the five-finger grass bin. And he goes, green for green, brown for brown. This is how you do it. And he thought he was being helpful. He thought he was educating me how to be a better salesperson.
How to make money.
And how to make money. That's right. And this man was, strangely enough, from Indiana, where the Meyer family had been. He'd learned about herbs from the Meyers because that's where he was from. Indiana. He was in Texas when I met him.
Oh my God.
And he had previously been a drug dealer. And his idea, I said, how did you get into this? And he said, well, I realized that hoodoo supplies and candles were just like drugs. You use them once, they're gone, you got to buy more. And he goes, that's it. That's how he got into doing this stuff. So it was nothing to him. It was just a product that he was going to sell to people who wanted it. They used it up and it was gone and they'd buy more.
And there you have it.
There you have it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to put him down. He did other things that were very good. He was a nice man in many ways, but that was
discrediting, because if people are trusting and getting into this, and maybe that's the reason why, when they go to put it together, it's not going to work.
Yes.
And so instead of thinking it's the herbs, they're thinking it's the practice.
That's correct. Boy, you said a mouthful there, honey. That was it. Because if you were, like, say you wanted to get a loan, and five-finger grass is used to get a loan, and instead you use catnip, I'm sorry, that catnip is for to get men attracted, like, cats to catnip, right? So what? The bank loan officer is going to make a move on you. That's not what you wanted. You wanted to get a business transaction, right? Yeah. Just work it the other way. Let's say he had a bunch of five-finger grass and you wanted catnip and you wanted, somebody to hug and kiss you. And he says, can I loan you some money?
Yeah, I mean, because in the way that I believe that magic exists and always has.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the incorporation of the right ingredients.
That's right.
Otherwise, people would not have lasted over the thousands of years doing this.
That's right.
Work. Then you get into the modern day, and you have the greed and the let's make a dollar. And of course, throughout history with the churches and stuff telling you, that stuff, is bad and stuff like that. And people that do find their way to it, if they don't have the right source, the right teachers, the right ingredients, it all looks like it doesn't work.
That's right. Well, what is important to me is to understand that this tradition was, I believe, on the verge of being broken. And the reason it was being broken was not some evil force, but that people had moved to the city and they didn't know what five-finger grass was. So they just, I need five-finger grass, and he supplied junk. But he was a drug dealer. I got to explain that again. So that might be a man that if you wanted to buy weed, he'd give you oregano. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Or cut it. Or I'm not going to go into too much detail about being a drug dealer, but you know what I'm saying?
Right.
The man was not, he was already used to cutting things. So back in the day when I was young, you wanted heroin, they'd give you milk sugar. You know what I'm talking about? So, so that says something about where he came from. I mean, where his background was. Not everybody is like that, but there are people who believe it's all your intention. And they'll tell you, oh, these herbs are just decoration and make you feel good. What it really is, it's all your intention. You just need to put your power into it. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's the case. If that was the case, why would the Bible have all these recipes? If you read the Bible, you'll see it says cleanse me with hyssop, or, and it says hyssop. I mean, it doesn't say cleanse me with, blackberry bushes, right?
Right,
It just
right,
cleanse me with
right,
hyssop, right?
right.
So you read those things. If you read in the Bible, like in Psalms 45, there's a recipe for oil of gladness. It tells you to take this, 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 and this. If you read in Exodus, it gives you the recipe for holy oil, this, 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 and this. The Bible tells you what to use and doesn't give you every recipe. And it comes out of a part of time and a place on the globe that's, has a certain repertoire. But if you look at it, some of the herbs and spices that are used in the Bible did not come from the Holy Land. They came from India. They had already a trade back in the day. Ancient Egyptians, when the Israelites were captive among the Egyptians were trading for cinnamon with people in India and Ceylon. So that all people knew the value of those spices and they traded them. But now people say, well, I don't need cinnamon. I'll just get cinnamon flavored food coloring or whatever.
No, no. And even buying the shelf herbs in
Yes.
the supermarkets.
Oh, yeah.
It's like buying vitamins in CVS or Walmart pharmacy that's been sitting there, uh,
Yes.
instead of getting them directly from those that are. There's a difference. There's a difference when you use fresh herbs
That's right.
and the stuff that's been sitting up there God knows how long. Which
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you. Okay, so does drying them out and storing them for years, does that decrease the power?
Yes and no. I'm going to tell you two things about this. This is probably, you offer me these questions and I can go in two directions. So number one, let's go back in time and we're going to talk about African American traditions. So when Africans were enslaved and brought over to the Americas, both South and North America, they were not allowed to bring their herbs with them, right? African traditions are primarily tropical. And so in tropical areas, plants stay green all year. They might have a little bit of a rest period, but they're always available. They might have a better time to pick them, or you might want to pick the seed pod when it's ripe. But tropical plants are used fresh. You don't have to dry them. You just go out and pick some more, right? Or buy some more in the market. So, but that all was lost because people were brought over. They were brought over without anything, without
Right,
any possessions. So when they got to, let's say, North America, who did they meet? They had their captors, their enslavers, and there were Native Americans. Okay, now the captors, we're going to go with them first. The captors came from England primarily, right? Now, England is in Northern Europe. It's a temperate zone, and all the plants go to sleep in the winter and they wake up in the spring, except for the evergreens, which are called evergreens because that's so unusual, because most plants will go to sleep and then wake up or die and grow from seed the next year. So all of the herbs, and remember, English people had their own herbal medicine. They had a lot of Scottish people, Irish people, Swedish, Norwegian, they all had their own medicine. Germans, French, everybody had their Belgian, everybody Dutch. But those plants would drop their leaves in the winter. So those nations, those people, prehistorically, when they were, wandering tribes people, they learned how to dry plants. They had to, or they'd have no medicine during the winter. They also learned how to grow root crops like potatoes and turnips and Swedes and things like that so that they could have them in the winter, how to put up apples in a barrel. They learned all this stuff about how to dry fish, how to dry meat, right? And make it all so it would last for the winter. Okay, they happened to be the captors of the Black Africans. Now, over in North America, there were the Native Americans. Same thing had happened. They'd come over on that land bridge from Siberia. It was cold as all get out. They come into a very wintry area. They come down farther south, but still everything freezes up in the winter. It's still North America. Even the southern part of North America is pretty much gets cold in the winter. And so they learned how to dry plants too. Parallel development. They did not learn it from the Europeans. They invented it on their own. Mostly the women figured out, got to dry these plants, got to have these roots, got to do this, or we won't have anything for the winter. So Africans come over. They have two ways to learn this. They can either learn it from their European captors. They tell somebody, well, I'm going to make you in charge of my herbal medicine because I know you had experience in Africa. You're an intelligent man. I've taught you English. I know you know how to set bones. I know you know how to doctor animals. You're going to have these herbs, and here's how we dried them in England, and we're going to grow them here. And they bring their European herbs. We're going to grow this herb and that herb and this herb, basil and whatever it's going to be. We're going to grow these herbs in America, and you're going to be in charge of that garden. So that's whole Black families that now have inherited and passed along European traditions.
Mm-hmm.
There were also Native Americans. So they'd say, the English would say, we don't have this herb. I can't get this herb. They go off to the Native American. What do you use? Native American root doctor, witch doctor. They want to call them herbal medicine man. They call him medicine man, which was the same as a shaman or a magician. They'd say, well, we use this herb. And they'd say, wow, this works even better than our European herb. Or, oh, it works exactly the same, or it looks the same. So they would have the Native American version. A lot of Black people ran away from slavery. This is undocumented history, but and I know they ran away and joined the Native Americans. They lived in the Native American village because it was more like what they were used to in Africa, and they weren't enslaved, right? That's why we have Black Cherokees now, for instance. So they learned Native American ways, and that included drying herbs. So now we have two traditions of drying herbs simply because of where people live. The same thing happened in South America. All that tropical band, Cuba, Venezuela, whatever, that's the tropics. Those natives didn't dry the herbs. So Black slaves that were brought by the Spanish to Cuba never learned how to dry herbs because in Cuba, they don't need to dry herbs. So they preserved more of the African ways of working. But Native Americans in North America dried their herbs. So now to answer your question, when people are asked, does drying an herb out reduce its efficacy, its power, its usefulness? Most people say no, because I grew up in a area out of the tropics. There's more land mass in the world out of the tropics than in the tropics. I grew up in a place where we dry the herbs. As long as they are dried and kept for one season, that is the way God intended them to be used, right? They are to be dried and to be used over the winter, dried, but don't keep them for 2, 3, 4 years. They begin to lose there's an expiration date.
Okay.
So how do you keep them from expiring? Well, then a whole system of working with them in alcohol, making a tincture or a tonic, that'll last for years. Brandy doesn't go bad, if you put them in brandy, or vinegar, or you can put them in honey. And if you put them in honey lasts forever. I mean, honey literally has no expiration date. So those kind of ways of making a decoction or brewing a tea, mixing it into an alcohol, strong alcohol, bottling it, that will last more than a year. That'll last maybe 3 to 5 years. But depending on what the herb is, if it's a root and you boiled it a lot to get the real goodness out of it, it can last 5 to 10 years if it was in an alcohol substrate.
Oh.
So it just depends on the herb. There's no one answer, right? There's no one answer. But the way you can tell, can you still smell it? Can you still taste it? If when you open up a bag of herbs and you look at it and it's just green stuff, you crush it in your hand and you just get this faint whiff, not good. Unless it was an herb that never had a lot of smell, because some don't, right? So you have to know your herbs. If you crush catnip, and we're just using that as an example, it should really smell like catnip and your cat should come running. Or actually 1/4 of cats. 1/4 of cats are attracted to it. The other 3/4 kind of go, interesting, not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's genetic. But if you crush 5-finger grass, not so much. It doesn't have a lot of scent. It's just what it's used for what it is. So you want it to have a little scent, but it'll never have the scent that catnip does. So every herb is different. Not every herb has a smell. And then there are herbs that are roots that will last for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I don't know ever of a John the Conqueror root completely going bad or dead unless you stepped on it and crushed it. It's as hard as a rock. So there are roots that will last there are roots that people have used as amulets and talismans, like a buckeye nut. I still have a buckeye nut that I've used as a talisman since the 1970s. It's still,
Oh,
nothing's going bad with that thing. It's just what it is, So I feel it. I feel its power, but I'm not going to eat it. I don't eat, eat buckeye. It's used as an amulet, So it depends so much on the root, and there's no one answer at that point. But if it's something that you're going to use medically, you want, if you haven't prepared it in some way, you'd want to be using it within a year or two at the most.
now in the preparation of these herbs, say like euthanasia, making it into a tincture or a
Yes,
syrup. Uh,
yes, yes. Echinacea, exactly.
do you do you need to have a bunch of uh, chemist bottles and things? I think because people, when they think, like, processing these herbs into something that can last, they're thinking like a science lab. But isn't it just like just boiling it and preserving it?
Well, yes. Echinacea, which is also known as Samson snake root or black Samson, um, it can be, first of all, carried as an amulet or power root, right? It's just of the root, right? But it's also used for any kind of septicemia. It's used against infections. It's really, it's used for,
Get rid of pneumonia, get mine.
yeah, exactly. Any kind of infection, it'll get rid of infection. And it can be also, it has a, it can be used for piles or hemorrhoids. It's got so many uses. It's a healer. It's a healer plant. So everyone loves echinacea. Yes, if you want to make echinacea to make your own little tincture, I recommend. Now, see, I come out of a family that made these tinctures. This is a family tradition of mine, and we use brandy. Why did we use brandy? As you know, I'm Jewish from
Yeah.
a mostly European Jewish and some Middle Eastern and some North African Jewish background. The North African and all, they didn't use brandy, but the German Jewish did. And so brandy is used. But in America, when I started working with Black teachers, I was taught to use whiskey. But whiskey is not African, whiskey is Irish, right?
Right.
So, and a lot of people nowadays, they use vodka. It's more like Everclear. I wouldn't
Ever
use it. Yeah, I wouldn't use
that.
Everclear. I wouldn't use Everclear, and I wouldn't use vodka because to me, vodka tastes like shit. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said
Yeah.
that, but the taste of vodka just disgusts me. But whiskey can taste good. So if you're going to make a tincture to be taken, it should be something you like the taste of. So I've even made tinctures in liqueurs. I've made, see, I'm a kind of a sweet tooth, so I like tinctures like Sabra, which is made with chocolate and oranges. And I like Kahlua, which is made with coffee.
Yeah.
You can make a tincture in
I
any of
like
it. You know what I'm saying? Why not?
yeah. What's
And
the
you can add
orange made from oranges?
Cointreau.
Yes. And
Yes,
what about rum?
rum is good too. People with a Cuban background, of course, they want rum. Um, but rum, what I was taught, the man who taught me most of this was, he was from Oklahoma, with family in St. Louis. He was a part Cherokee and part Black, and but would be identified as looking Black. But if you looked at his facial structure, he looked like a Native American. He told me to use whiskey, and I just listened. I'm not going to say, well, hey, my family uses brandy. I said, well, tell me why and what kind of whiskey. And then he went into a whole magical side trip, which was fascinating to me. He said, well, if you're going to be using something for love, use Four Roses whiskey. And if you're going to be using something that's going to be destructive, use Old Crow, because to the Cherokee, the crow is the bird of death. Mm-hmm. And he said, if you're going to be using something that you want to have success, he goes, you can use Crown Royal or Seagram's 7, Crown for gambling luck. And so he used the whiskey that had he said, if you want it for health, he goes, use Johnny Walker and that'll keep you walking, right? So he used the whiskey that had the name on it and the intention that went with what he wanted, but it was just the whiskey that he was using to make the extraction. I
Wow.
learned a lot. I learned that was vented
Wow.
on San Pablo Avenue.
Like using some of that symbolism and a little bit of everything when he,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
think so.
Wild turkey. He said use wild turkey if you want to be. That was like for random sex or something. You want to be wild turkey. Yeah, yeah. He had a reason for every brand of whiskey.
Wow, but that makes sense.
It does. It does.
Wow. Like
But
in magic.
Jack Daniels number 7. That's for shooting dice.
Yeah.
Some 11, right?
Wow.
He had one for everything.
But it makes sense. It
Sure.
really makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. It does. It
Oh,
does.
God.
So
Oh,
I started doing that, but I also, like I said, my family, we used brandy. We made a little, like brandy and honey syrupy things, and with the herbs in them. And that's just my family. We did that. And I'll tell you another one that's a really good shortcut come out of my family. There is a cough drop called Riccola cough drops. They're made from Swiss herbs, and they've got
right.
they're bitter and hot. They got menthol. They got all you got name it. They got thyme, and they got eucalyptus. A little bit of everything in. You can take those and add a little water and melt them down. All right, now you got a syrup of them. Throw that into brandy.
Mm-hmm.
Throw a little bit of lemon in it. They also make lemon Riccola, by the way. You can buy lemon Riccola, but I just prefer the real lemon because I live in California. You got a lemon tree right out back. Squeeze the lemon juice fresh into that. The Riccola, maybe a little bit more honey if you need it, but the Riccola is pretty sweet. And you made yourself an instant herbal cough drink, and that is good because that Riccola is all made with organic herbs. Some of these commercial things are just as good. You don't have to make everything yourself. You don't have to be a
Right.
mad scientist.
Right.
Riccola cough drops, I swear by them, and Vicks Vapor Rub.
Yeah. Because I
Vicks
have
Vapor,
done that. I have done that just thinking, wouldn't it be better if I could just like use it in a tea or something like that?
yes,
And and it worked.
yeah. Vicks Vapor Rub. Now, Vicks Vapor Rub is made with petroleum jelly, which is a laxative. It's like drinking mineral oil, like when you have a horse that's costive or constipated, you give the horse mineral oil and poops, so it'll do that to you, which is not a bad idea if you got a cold and everything. So Vicks Vapor Rub is not poisonous, but it will loosen your stool a little bit. But I know people who would take a tablespoon or a teaspoon for a child of Vicks Vapor Rub and eat it
Yeah.
because it has everything right in it. Now, if you wanted to make your own Vicks Vapor Rub that was edible, you could make it either in butter if you didn't want to make it in lard. A lot of people would rather make it in lard. It'll keep pretty longer in lard, especially if you use what's called kidney suet, which is the fat from the top of the kidneys. In almost every animal, to keep the kidneys cushioned, the fat on your kidneys is harder fat. It's not soft belly fat.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you go and ask the butcher for kidney suet, it has fibrous connective tissue. You melt it down, you strain out the connective tissue. You can tell I've done this a lot, right?
Yes, and you can tell I'm taking notes.
So, but you want the kidney suet, and kidney suet is also used. And people will use it for bird seed. They'll embed bird seed in it, so the birds will peck to get the seed out and also eat kidney suet. So kidney suet is what makes a good stiff ointment, and you can then take your same ingredients that are in your Vicks Vapor Rub, and you're going to make a strong decoction of them, stir them in the kidney suet, and then just keep it warm, like in a double boiler, till the water evaporates, leaving all of the herb stuff in the kidney suet. Now you have an edible version of Vicks Vapor Rub that will not make you be laxative. And really, like I said, but it's not the kind of laxative that you're going to be on the in the bathroom for hours. I'm not talking like that, but it's
Right,
like you
right,
got to just
right.
remember if you're eating petroleum jelly, that's what you got. But because it just greases you, right? But the lard also is nutritive to a certain extent. It's fat. then you could do it in butter. Butter is nutritive, right?
Right.
And so if you had somebody who was of a weak constitution, they were not, maybe they were elderly, or maybe they were very young, you might want to make the Vicks Vapor Rub herbs, all the herbs that are in Vicks, or all the herbs that are in Riccola, and the ingredients. The FDA is our friend now. We have to have all those ingredients listed. Look them up, find out what they are, and then put them, boil them up into a tea. If there's any roots, you want to boil them. If it's herbs, you just want to simmer them. And just pour boiling water. I don't mean simmer. Pour boiling water over them, let them steep. Is what I'm saying, steep them. But if they're roots, you want to simmer them a little bit. Get all that together, and then put it into butter, and keep the butter warm till all the water evaporates, and you've just got butter with the herb stuff in it. Very easy to do. Very easy. I used to do this. A lot of this, like I said, you'll find a lot of this in these books by the Meyer family. They've documented everything. They really were good at it. And one of the things that they did, which I appreciated, they would not sell an herb that you could kill yourself with. They had those herbs, but you had to apply to them for a really toxic herb that might have had a medical purpose. They'd say, you must explain what you're going to use it for, then we'll sell it to you. Yeah. But we won't sell it just random, because they didn't want people killing their relatives.
So how can you approach treating your animals? Because here's the thing. Now, we gave our dog yeast and garlic forever. Our dog lived to be 18 in people years.
Wow.
And all of a sudden now you can't give it. They don't want you giving garlic to your animals. I mean, has something happened?
Yeah, I have wondered about this.
Because our dogs, both of them, father and son, lived 18 and 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we never had given them heartworm medicine. They didn't, well, we were in California. It wasn't like out here in Texas, but they weren't bombarded with fleas or anything. And then all of a sudden, everywhere I don't give your cats and dogs uh, garlic. And they used to eat scraps sometimes when we'd have steak and onions. So what has happened? What has changed?
I wonder about that too, and I wish I had an answer, because no veterinarian has been able to tell me an answer to that. I really don't know the answer. And the thing that bothers me I did have a long talk with the veterinarian about why animals are not living as long as they used to. And he said it's all about the pet food. The pet food is adulterated. You might remember there was a few years ago where all those cats and a few dogs died from the melamine in the cat food that came from China.
Yeah, salmonella and
yeah, salmonella too, but everything. There's been so many things like that. Back in the day, I don't remember cats dying of kidney disease to the extent that they do now.
and they do now.
Right. They do
Every
now.
time you turn around,
Right. That's right. Yeah. So my feeling is, put your animal on a natural diet, whatever that animal would eat in the wild. It's going to cost you more, but on the other hand, if you love the animal and you have the animal, if it's a cat, the best you can do is chicken, because they would eat birds, or rabbit. They would probably eat rats, is close enough to rabbit. Something like that. Just I wouldn't give a cat beef. A cat never is going to be really eating beef. You know what I mean? I just give them whatever we can get that's closest to what they would eat in the wild. They do eat insects in the wild too. Cats eat butterflies. If you've never seen them catch a butterfly and eat it,
they do, and crickets.
And crickets, exactly. So you can make up your own cat diet. Just try to figure it out for yourself. And We all have freezers now. This is not rocket science. We all have freezers. Make up little patties, freeze them. There you go. You've
Yeah.
done it. And it's like prepping for your cat. Now you can buy, other people will do it for you and charge you an arm and a leg.
Yeah,
But
I do it because it's just me here. So
yeah,
when I buy food and I cook, it wouldn't be hard to separate because I eat chicken and fish. Uh,
sure. Right.
and
And
it wouldn't be hard to separate a
right.
little bit
Yeah.
for
And
indoor cats.
exactly. And
Outdoor, they can catch their own.
yeah, and cats also eat the stomach contents and guts of their prey animals. So
Yeah,
that means they're going to have a very small amount of seed grains, but what size? They're not going to have big old wheat berries. It's going to be like birdseed. And so just take the finest little birdseed, like say they caught a chickadee, right? They'd eat the chickadee's stomach contents, right? Take a little
yeah,
bit of that birdseed in there, grind it up a little bit like it had gone through the bird's gizzard. It's very easy to recreate what they would have eaten.
right,
And
right.
and try to work out the proportions. The animals will love it. They will feel like they've had, I mean,
Yeah,
that's what.
yeah,
And I'm going to tell you one thing that comes out of keeping reptiles as pets. Reptiles don't do so well on pet chow. You feed your snake live mice, right? If you have a snake, I don't, because it just bothers me. I mean, but I don't want to feed my cat live baby bunnies. You know what I mean? It's too much.
right.
So I have to come up with a way to feed my cat something that's good for the cat. Now, canned fish and all, if you just give them canned fish, they're going to get mercury poisoning. There's too much mercury. It's too much of one thing. Whatever mercury's all in the ocean. Too much fish is not so good. You want to give them a varied chicken and fish.
Yeah.
Most cats like fish. So you have to think about, it's a
And
responsibility.
carrots, and I
Paris, yes.
know
Yeah.
I can uh chop up. I'll lightly boil them, just
Mm-hmm,
lightly,
mm-hmm.
and chop some up, mix it with some rice and chicken together, and
Yes.
but I'm kind of scared because now they tell us that there's arsenic in the rice, and
Yeah. I
eh,
hear you. This is a bigger problem than herbal medicine or hoodoo can solve. And the name of that problem is overpopulation by human beings.
yeah,
They
or
have
chemical use.
it's just not going to, we're going to be in a different world. We are in a different world. When I was young, they started warehousing, actually before you and I were born, they started warehousing people in what were called tenement buildings. They
Yes,
just stack them up, in these
yes,
buildings. Then they
yes,
went to what were called the projects, and
yes,
they'd stack them up even worse. Well, the projects led to crime. It just was too ugly a place. The tenements had led to crime. The projects led to crime. Now they've got what they call garden apartments, right? You know what I'm talking about?
yes,
They're just acres and acres. They take acres and acres of beautiful field and forest and pastures in California, and they just put houses up one next to. But every house looks like a house. It has a pointed roof and a little bit of this and that gables, so it looks like everyone's got a house. But they're called garden apartments. Sometimes they're mission style, and they'll do it all with stucco, and it'll look like some sort of Spanish colonial thing.
yeah,
They figured out a new way to warehouse people. The reason they can do that and take all that beautiful agricultural land out of um, out of agriculture is that they're buying food cheaper from other countries, right? Well,
mm,
eventually those countries, if you look at how those people are living, they're in what's called barrios or favelas. They're living in corrugated tin shacks, right? Being warehoused in corrugated tin shacks. And so you just look at it and you go, there's just too many people.
yeah, and they also otherwise their food with human food too, which
Mm.
has pinworms and things like that in them.
Oh
They,
my God, yes. Oh my
yeah,
God.
yeah,
So, yeah, for me, I look at all of that and I think, well, what can I do that's
yeah,
low impact? How can I buy locally? What can I grow myself? What can I harvest? I have this herb company, Lucky Mojo Curio Company. I should give them a shout out, right?
yep,
And Lucky Mojo Curio Company, a lot of people think everything we grow ourselves. No, we don't. Um, we grow some of it, but a lot. We have only 2 acres. We can't grow enough herbs here on 2 acres to supply everything that we have. And some things grow better in other places. But we do grow what we can and harvest what we can on our property. And we also have friends and neighbors who have certain, plants that they will pick for us and dry for us. I think everybody should have a dehydrator.
Yeah, I do.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
No, and I have 7 acres that I share with my 2 horses.
Uh-huh.
But I want to do something with, but I'm just not sure because sometimes things grow and I have woods out in the back.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's just that you just don't know what you can cultivate
Right.
and what is better to leave wild. Like I've been out there searching and searching. Dandelion. We used to find that in the middle of the sidewalk in Oakland, California.
Mm-hmm.
And here I
Well,
am on wooded land and stuff, and I can't find any dandelion.
yeah. Yeah. Well, you can always introduce them. Dandelions are naturalized in California, but they you have to have the right environment for them. Take a tip from that Joseph Meyer. Find
Yeah.
out exactly what microclimate they like, and then see if you can introduce them. For instance, uh, forget-me-not flowers. When I moved onto my property here, that place was just covered with forget-me-not flowers. Somebody had planted them as a garden flower probably back in 1910, and they just took over. 2 doors down, they don't have any. 2 doors up the other way, they don't have any. But I have them, and they creep just off to my direct neighbors a little bit. They usually pull them out. So I have created accidentally, or someone created an environment. They introduced this plant, it took over. It just wants to live here as if it was at home, but it's actually a European plant. So people call them invasives, but they won't invade everywhere.
Right.
And
Obviously.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I think to tell everybody, one of the things that is your friend is your local state college or university. When I was young, uh, we lived in East Bay, so I'd go to the University of California. Okay? Just
Mhm.
go right up into the life sciences building, go up to the botany department, just look for an open door. There's a professor. I say, hi, I live here and I have a plant. And I'd hold this plant and they say, oh yes, that's, communis, occidentalis, blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, thank you. And I'd go, I mean,
Yeah, I did that with the mushrooms that were growing in the back, and something just told me I should be able to eat these. And I could. They're what they call balloon mushrooms, but you have to
yeah,
get them quick, and they
uh-huh,
look like balloons, sort of.
uh-huh,
And and I could eat them. My of course my parents, they were like, "No, don't feed me any." I said, "No, I checked it. I had them checked out, and it's okay." But
yeah,
you have to get them. They sprout up right after the rains and when the humidity, but you have to get them while they're fresh.
right,
Uh, and they tasted really good. They don't have any of those webby things in them. They're like
right.
sliced bread.
That's right. I know the kind you mean. Puffballs, some people call them.
Yeah, and they were good. I tried 'em with eggs.
Yeah. Well, I was lucky. My mother came from Europe, and the family they'd gone through World War One. There was no food around. My grandmother had a botany book. There were a bunch of botany professors in my family, and they learned how to harvest and forage wild foods. When my mother came to America to escape from Hitler, she was poor, but she still remembered how to forage foods. And one of the first things I remember when we moved to Berkeley from San Francisco, my mother said, oh, this is a great city to live in. And I said, why? And she goes, there's wild cherries and plums, and we can make jam. And we would just walk up into the nicer part of town, up the hills, up on Euclid Street, and they had planted it all with those, those beautiful, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
My mother would just go, we'd just take baskets and we just pick. And it was all in the parking strip. You're not going on anyone's land. It's the
Right.
city land. And we'd just go home and we'd make jam and jelly and syrup, whatever we could make with all those twins and the bird cherries or whatever you want to call them. And I then, when I left home, I began doing the same thing, pick it and sell it to my hippie friends. Here, I made jam, and I'd sell it for $1 a jar, right? So there are things that you can get that are all over. Wherever you live, there will be something.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that means you can trade it. You could go on Etsy and start a little shop and, I've got sassafras because I live in Missouri, or I've got eucalyptus because I live in California. Anyone want to
That's
trade?
what I wish I had out here for the fleas and mosquitoes, you know.
Yeah. Now, see, when I was young, one of the ways I made a little bit of money, eucalyptuses have those little nuts. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And depending on which species, they may be covered with kind of a grayish bloom. It's like a powdery. They're greenish. I'm not talking about when they get all dry and brown. When they're young, they're kind of grayish, and that has little capsules of a scent in it, and you can rub them. They really smell like eucalyptus. So I learned how to take a big old fat needle, and like a darning needle, and drive it through those when they were young, and make collars for dog collars and cat collars with
Wow.
eucalyptus. Oh yeah. I did everything during a living. I scrambled, and so I would sell those. Put them together with a little hook and eye at the end, and put it on your dog. And I'd make them for the dogs, and they would be to keep the fleas off the dogs. And they worked. They really worked.
Yes.
They only last for so long. Eventually, it dries out. It loses. And I'd say to people, if you touch it and you can smell it, it's good. If it's, you've got to buy another one. But I sold them for 50 cents, right? It was just no big deal. Just there you go. There's your dog collar. And your flea bedding also. I would make flea pillows for dogs, and these would have eucalyptus leaves,
Yeah.
silver dollar eucalyptus.
God, you would think they would grow in Texas somewhere
You'd think so. Yeah, I don't know why
because
not.
it's so much sand and weird soil. Like on my land alone, I have red sand. I don't know where it comes from. I have dirt,
Hmm.
and then there's this other kind of stuff. I don't, I don't even know, what it is. I mean,
Is it
all in the same area.
is
So
it
that,
like a whitish clayish thing?
yeah, like
Mhm.
clay.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, that's probably some prehistoric sea bottom or something.
wow. Wow, but I know it's a mess because, and when it rains, I'm always slipping and sliding when I go back through the woods, hit
Mhm.
a patch and fall and stuff because that clay stuff is so slippery when it's wet.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Well, probably the reason eucalyptuses don't grow there, it may get just a little too cold for them. They, what's your lowest temperature in the winter?
Well, I would have said the lowest temperature would have been like 23 degrees until 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And then it got down to like 5 degrees or
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, it lasted, when Texas had that
Oh, that
so-called
big storm. Yeah.
storm. But I mean, that was so shocking. Uh,
Well,
but
that even damaged. We
oh,
had a cold snap this winter, and it damaged some of the eucalyptus trees here too. They don't like
yeah,
to get cold.
it's weird because I could have sworn, I mean, for the last 20 years, I would have sworn Texas didn't have a winter. three
Hmm.
days, and then in February, you can count maybe around Valentine's it dropping down and maybe a little few droplets of snow.
Hmm.
That was my experience in the last 20 years until this year when the snow actually stayed on the ground for like 4 days.
Hmm.
So,
Well, whatever you cannot get locally, set up an arrangement with somebody to trade.
yeah,
There are seed exchanges, And you can find them on the internet. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them via any kind of forums they might have. And
Yeah, yeah. And
I
it's
have,
important. It's important now to get seeds and stuff because I think they're slowly disappearing. I think somebody is hoarding them because I used to be able to grow my tomato plants by going to the store, getting a tomato, slicing it, a thin slice of tomato, put it in a pot, and in a week or two, there's my new plants.
yes.
Same thing with everything I could replant, and now I can't. They're like dead.
Well, this whole thing about this genetic modification. I don't want to tell you something you already know. They've created what would be called dead end lines of plants. So they produce a plant, but it's sterile. So each time
Right.
they make it, they have to breed. It's a hybrid, and it's a sterile hybrid. And they do this to prevent people from growing their own food. And this is for real. I mean,
I know.
you're not imagining it. It's for real. They do it to prevent people. They've done it with corn too, tomatoes, corn, anything
And
like that. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
beets.
Ah,
The
okay.
the red beets, the beets.
Yeah, red beets. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, they do it. They're modified now so that they're making the sugar out of it and stuff, and so man. But I have found a few places, and they're not that expensive that they have actually, from generation to generation, have saved seeds.
Right. Seed savers. There's a group called Seed Savers.
Yeah, and
And what you're looking for is heritage seed. People will call them that. That's, there's a lot of people fighting back and always have fought back. Same thing, carrying this back to E.P. Reed, carrying it back to the Myers. There are people who have fought back against this urbanization and the denial of food to people. The denial of food, unless it comes through the distribution system that is used to create profit, right?
yeah,
And so there are local gardens. Everybody listening to this show, look up and see if there are any community gardens where you live. If you can't find one, start one. There
yeah,
are there are seed saver groups that will share. Now, I'm going to tell the truth here. A lot of the people who are into preserving rural lifestyles, a lot of them are people who are not politically in favor of everyone having access to what they have access to. And I'm going to put this in very plain English. There are a lot of right-wing, white, racist preppers. You know what I'm talking about?
yeah,
And they have stuck with this partly because they owned land, they owned farms, they have a tradition. Whereas during the so-called urbanization of the Black community, which is really driving Black people off the land and into warehoused tenements, projects, and garden apartments, Black people have lost touch with nature more than white people did. And so the number of Black owned farms is disproportionately low compared to the number of white owned farms when you compare the number of white people and Black people. So if we
yeah,
say 12% of Americans are Black, and I don't know what the number is, but it's going to be a way lower number, 5%, 1% of farms are owned by Black people. So part of this is people have to stand up for themselves and say, you know, okay, I'm just going to go all total. I'm going to go total all left wing. Remember, I come out of Oakland. Okay, so I'm just going to say it like it is. When Warner Brothers and these other big music, RCA, Columbia, when they labeled Black music urban, they put a meme into people's head that Black people are urban,
yeah,
right? And that meant you can't be rural. And they took country music, and that was white music. So now what are they telling us? Every day of our lives, if you go and want to listen to some music and it's by Black people, you have to look for urban. And if you want to listen to music by white people, you have to listen to country, even though they may be oxycodone addicts living in a basement in a city. It's
Right.
country music, right? And
Right.
so they have made these overlords of taste and product saleability have made it to disconnect Black people from their roots. Every time we use the word root work, we are affirming rural life. We are affirming, and I'm not saying we as me being Black, anybody who uses the word root work, root doctoring, herb doctoring, we are affirming rural life. We are affirming our connection to the earth, right? This is so important because nothing hurts my heart more than when a young Black woman says to me, well, I'd like to know how you made that cough syrup, blah, 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 but we don't do that in my family. You know, we
Yeah.
live in whatever city. And I'm like, what about your grandmother? Well, now that I'm so old, their grandmother doesn't even do it. I used to say, ask your grandmother. Now it's ask your great grandmother, you know, and I'm looking at this and going, people, white and Black, have to reclaim their connection to the earth.
That's right.
And step number one, don't have so many babies because it's just killing the earth. You know, but that's just, you know, I'm a kind of a fanatic, and I'll admit it. When I say these things, I'm preaching, and I hope someone under the sound of my voice hears me preaching to say, don't let them call you urban just because you're Black. Here you are with horses, right?
Oh yeah, from a family of farmers, working farm.
That's
That
right.
was their living.
That's right. And you know, you were told Black cowboys barely didn't even exist, or they didn't exist at all, right? We were all told that, right? Turn on the television and there's Bonanza and there's all white cowboys. You know.
Come on now, because the one thing that the slaves did know was farming.
That's right. That's right. And then there was that feeling about, I'm going to better myself and get away from farming.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that's caused a loss of knowledge. And there was pain being forced into farming, but when you think about it, that people who were brought over had already been farmers in Africa, and there was nothing to be ashamed about in being a farmer. And but you know, sure, some people wanted to go and become a college professor. That's good. But
like my aunts and uncles, you know.
Yeah.
They
And
they couldn't get away from the land fast enough.
Well, that's right. And different people, everyone has their own path. I'm not saying everyone should become a farmer, but I'm saying everyone should at least have a knowledge and understanding of the value of it. And I look at things like Black jockeys. Black jockeys were like driven out of existence, right? And there are groups. There's Black rodeos now, you know, and people trying to reclaim this tradition before it becomes a broken tradition.
And my family has been long standing, the Black trailblazers.
Trailblazers, that's right.
Yep. You
That's
know,
right.
the Black cowboys. I've had cousins in the rodeo.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you a story on myself. When I was a little girl, I was 5 years old, and my mother, who was not a very American and she didn't speak English very well, she asked the upstairs neighbors, what record should I buy for my daughter for her 5th birthday? I was given a little record player, and I was given a couple of albums of 78 RPM records. And the man upstairs was a very left-wing Jewish man, and he believed he was politically like a communist. And he said, well, you must give her some records that will teach her about American history. So I was given a record called Dust Bowl Ballads by Woody Guthrie, which was all about the destruction of the farming community, the white folks. And I was also given an album called Negro Folk Songs and Spirituals by Leadbelly, who was born in Murringsport, Louisiana, but had lived a lot of his life in Texas.
Right.
And on that record, in the album, one of the records, there was a song called When I Was a Cowboy Out on the Western Plains. Have you ever heard that song?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
When I was a cowboy out on the western plains. And I listened to that and I thought, that must be wishful thinking on his part. There never could have been a black cowboy. I was 5 years old. And I thought, there couldn't have been a black cowboy. That just, it doesn't make any sense. My head hurts, 5-year-old child. And what does it mean? And of course, I asked my mother, how can a black man be a cowboy? She goes, I don't know. I only just got here. I don't know. Well, I went upstairs to ask Harry Feinberg, the man who told me to have this record. And my mother said, what does it mean to be a black cowboy? And he unloaded. He told us the whole story.
Yeah.
And then I thought there were black cowboys out on the western plains. But that was a big eye opener for me at the age of 5 that I had been lied to. They were lying. When you know, Ohio silver away. It was a white guy and an Indian. There were no black cowboys. And I after that I began to look for the truth. I always look for the truth underneath the lie.
Yeah. And another truth, they have found that the Moors, they know now that on the western, um, the eastern closest to Africa,
Uh-huh.
that most of the Native Americans
Mm-hmm.
that went down into Mexico were actually of Moorish descent.
Right.
That's why when you look at, and Moorish meaning African,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why when you look at all of these ancient uh, buildings and statues and things like that, you look at them very closely.
Mm-hmm. Like those big Olmec statue heads.
Exactly.
They look like Africans. Right. Right. They don't. Yeah, I got it. I got it. I believe it too.
And so half of the Native Americans were dark skinned, and I've seen some from pictures from way back that look like an actual tribe that's in Chad, because it's black women with hair down to their ankles,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
there's a tribe in Chad that the women are like that. They grow their hair
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
long, and on the Pacific, it's more the Asian coming from
Right.
that side
That's right.
and coming in, and then the Europeans
Right.
came. And so this is a land full of mystery, lies, deceit, and wonder.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Well,
And,
I'm going to ask you a question. Now you've got these couple of horses, and and you come from a family that has background as farmers, rodeo, all of that, cowboys and stuff. Is that why you moved back to Texas from the
well,
East?
actually, no. My stepfather, who I consider my father, is from here
Uh-huh.
and from the town that I'm living in.
Mm-hmm.
And he was raised here on the farm along with his 13 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
So when he got sick, he had to, at 34, but he tried to hang on working for longer. But he has that cane type of thing that goes on where they can't pinpoint it or fix it. He had to retire. And so we had land in Oklahoma. They went to Oklahoma first. And
Mm-hmm.
that got too cold and only aggravated his condition. And so he decided to come back to Texas. Although he hadn't lived in Texas since he got out of the Navy in Alameda.
Uh-huh. I see.
Uh, and he's 80 something now. And they've been here for about 25 years.
Oh.
And and so I came because they need somebody. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
a child now. And so that is why I'm here. But I also had a dream that I would be this age and I'd be on my white horse and I was hugging a tree. I was, and sure enough, our Arabian who we had to put to sleep was white.
Uh-huh.
And have lots of trees. And I'm a city girl, born and raised in the East Bay,
Hmm.
but I've always loved the idea of the country and freedom.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what it means to me. I
Yeah.
don't have to listen to anybody's music blasting. I
Right.
can go outside naked at midnight and dance,
Right.
and I'm not afraid.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I wouldn't change it for anything.
I wish that message could be gotten across to more people who love the old ways in theory. And I'm speaking here also to the white listeners,
Yeah.
those little white girls who want to study Wicca, and they want to know about the old Scottish cunning women, and they want to know about Irish, uh, you know, ancient goddesses, but they live in a little apartment, and they don't, they can't even light a candle because they're living in an apartment where open flames are not allowed. And I said, go seek your freedom and find what you can, but do it in such a way that you don't harm anyone. Don't come in and like, I'm going to own all this land and y'all animals have to leave. I'll tell you,
Oh,
that's another
no.
thing. I always advocate for the animals. And I'm going to tell you, if you own land, I want you to think about one thing. Even if you only owned a half an acre, there's going to be some mice on that acre, half acre. There's going to be some crickets. There's going to be something.
Rabbit. Oh,
Nobody told the animals they had to pay
right.
taxes. So they don't know how to pay taxes. I'm sure some of them would pay taxes if they only could be told. I mean, some of the parrots and some of the wiser horses would probably figure out a way to pay taxes if you told them. They don't know. Well,
Yeah.
if they don't pay taxes, that means they don't get to own land because all land is taxed by the United States government. That tax is the same as renting our land from the government. Every bit tax we pay. So somebody has to pay tax for the foxes, tax for the mice, tax for the quails, tax for everything. Now, when people own land and they don't keep some of it wild, they cultivate it all to the borders. They say it's all mine and my control. They haven't paid taxes for anything but what they've cultivated. Maybe they got a few rose bushes, but they haven't thought of it. They go, I'm going to use weed killer and get rid of all the weeds. Well, they haven't paid taxes for the weeds. The weeds are going to die. They haven't paid taxes for the mice. I'm going to put out mice traps and kill all the mice. Well, you might want to put mice traps around your house or your granary, but somebody would
Or
have
have cats.
or have a cat. That's right. Let the cat keep the mice population down, but not kill it out because cats are smart enough not to kill their own food source. Right. So those things need to be thought about. Who pays taxes for the animals on the land? Now, I only have 2 acres, but we've got families of quail out back, owl. There's an owl at the corner of our property in the next. He doesn't know the fence boundary because he flies, but there's a tree he sits in. You can hear him at 2 in the morning. Woo, 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 woo. He's one of those owls. And then there's the quails. They go, Chicago, Chicago. And they're out there in the back. And there's little mice. There's foxes. We have chickens, and the foxes have come and killed our chickens. Well, it's a sacrifice. We have to buy more chickens. Um, but we have given over one half of our land. That is 1 acre. We do nothing with it other than it has apples and plums and fig trees on it. But the possums come. The possums will eat those things. The foxes actually climb the trees and eat the figs. And so we offer free smorgasbord to the animals on 1 acre, and we pay their taxes on 1 acre.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. Because like there's 35 now feral cats that make their home. They've
Oh,
been fixed, most of them. Uh, and they get fed
mm-hmm,
once a day, and then they're
mm-hmm,
on their own. Um, there's been like 4 or 5 little, I call them teenage deer out in the back,
mm-hmm,
and they come at night and in the morning. I've seen bunny rabbits. I've seen those big. I've seen the snakes, uh,
mm-hmm,
the gophers, the armadillos,
mm-hmm.
cats somewhere uh, out and about. Um, and and they have free run as long as they leave my garden alone. I'm fine. They have
Mhm.
woods out back, and my dog. There's the horses, and we're on 7 acres, and they're adjoining. It just goes straight back across the woods and the creek and to the other property, and that is where I am, and I like it like that.
That's nice. That's very nice.
Only complaint I have is the possums and the raccoons that find their way under my house so that now I can't have we spent so much putting up repairing the duct because I'm in a mobile on this end, and they've torn it down.
Hmm.
But other than that, it's freedom for
Yeah.
everybody.
We have raccoons too, and we have a lot of birds, and I,
Hawks,
yeah,
red-tailed hawks,
yep,
cardinals,
uh-huh.
the
Oh, cardinal,
sparrows. I mean, it's nature, and
right.
it's funny coming from a city girl. I grew up in the city, but I always loved the ocean, and I love country.
Hmm.
And as
Hmm.
long as there's no bears around, I'm good.
Yeah. I think of raccoons as like a little cross between a fox and a bear. They're kind of like little tiny bears, but they're fox-like bears. I love raccoons,
So
and I
cute.
like to put out. Yeah, I like to put out food for them. I mean, raccoons like cat food,
Yeah,
and
they do. And they come up and eat what's left.
yeah, they clean it up for you. That's right. We don't have cardinals. I miss them. When I lived in Missouri, we had cardinals. Those are nice. But we
Yeah.
have blue jays. We have Steller's blue jays, and those are a treat. And
Yeah.
we have little black-capped chickadees, and yeah, there's all kinds of birds. Of
And
course,
you can see the sky with all the stars at night.
that's right. That's
And it's,
right.
I
And it
mean, oh,
makes a difference.
wow.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, if you, as a respected elder, can do more to convince Black people to move out into the country and grow their own herbs and set up some herb distribution, seriously, there is, we don't need to rely on China for our herbs. And what happened, people in China would work for less money. They were, all the herbs, starting in the 90s, herbs that used to be grown in America come from Iowa, come from Indiana, come from Pennsylvania, wherever they're going to come from. They're grown in up Pacific Northwest, Oregon, and they grow a lot of peppermint up in there. All of that stuff started coming from China. First, the Chinese stuff was just cheaper. That's it. So you had a question: am I going to get this Chinese stuff because it's cheaper? Am I going to support some guy in Oregon for a common plant like peppermint?
Living in a mansion.
And everyone makes a decision, so they choose China. Well, then the guy in Oregon says, well, I can't do that anymore. Well, then Oregon legalizes marijuana. He goes, I'm done with peppermint. I'm growing marijuana. Goodbye, right? So now you have to get your peppermint from China or wherever it might be. Now, peppermint may be a poor example because you can still get peppermint from Morocco, of all places.
Yeah.
But whatever it's going to be, they come from China. When the pandemic hit, we couldn't get anything from China. You know how many herbs we were out of? It was like we had, it's like that, it's like in the Bible, you sold your birthright for a mess of pottage.
Right.
For a short-term gain, we sold our right to our herbs and roots. And
Yeah.
now there are herbs we cannot get, and I can name them for you. You'd be surprised because some of them are so standard herbs, but we cannot get them. And of course, every once in a while you can. But right now, for instance, we can't get Queen Elizabeth root whole. You can get it in chips. Why you get it in chips? Because in China they chip it up. Well, so you'd have to go all the way to China. You'd have to speak Chinese, and you'd say, "Don't chip these up. Sell them to me whole." And then they'd say, "Well, I only sell them by the container, and they're bagged in. They're in 1 pound bags or whatever they're going to be in. That's it. That's your choice. You have to buy $10,000 worth of them to get them whole, maybe $15,000. We may never see whole Queen Elizabeth roots again, but I used to get them from Connecticut. They were grown in Connecticut. Well, the lady who owned the farm in Connecticut, an old white lady, very respected elder, she died. Well, the other people, kept up the farm for a while. When I went to go buy some more, now the farm was gone. They sold the property, and now it's going to be, somebody's summer camp or something. It's no longer what it was. So buy local if you can. And if you can't, start thinking about growing. Start
Yes.
thinking about, can you grow these plants? I'm 73, and I don't know how old you are, but we need some younger
Heaven.
people. Yeah. We need some younger people to say, when I was 23, I was out there growing those plants, right? I was growing catnip. I was growing all that stuff. And I'm telling you, we need some people out there to be growing these herbs for us. Now, some of them will never make a lot of money. They won't be worth it. Grow oregano, a whole big pillow bag of it's $3.95. It doesn't, it's nothing. Oregano is just something. But the big ones are the ones that are whole roots, Queen Elizabeth root, devil shoestring root, John the Conqueror root, ginseng. Those were the runniest. Samson snake root, which is echinacea. All of those. Do you know that our federal government, USDA, put out books and pamphlets on how to grow those commercially back in the 19 teens and 20s? Those can still be had. The US government printing office did it for farmers who wanted to earn money growing herbs. And
Yeah.
these are good. They're still valid. They still tell you how to grow them, what climate you need, what zone, what kind of mineral soil you need, what kind of watering you need. Anybody who listens to this who loves the old ways, consider making yourself an herbalist and growing these plants, because Indiana Botanic Gardens no longer exist. They changed their name to Botanic Choice, and they sell supplements. I mean, they sell good turmeric in a capsule. Okay, turmeric in a capsule is great, but they don't no longer sell 1 pound bags of
Right.
sweet
Oh,
woodruff,
right.
bulk.
Right.
So we need to think about this
Yeah.
and seriously consider it. What is our next generation doing?
Because I was thinking, even because I sit here and I try to think, okay, I want this land to keep going,
Yeah,
that maybe people who are truly interested that live in the city to just like do little spaces on people's land that
that's
are
right.
growing and go out there, bring your kids and you know just connect with each other and share. It doesn't take much.
That's right.
And it's a learning process. It could be fun for that you can go to on the weekends. And I mean, come on, they just can't let it all go to 50-room homes and things like that. They
That's right.
can't.
Well, community gardens can be put in vacant lots. And nowadays, back in the 70s, there was a big community garden movement, and nobody really knew how to stop people. Nowadays, they say, well, that land isn't properly zoned, or this or that or the other. So you
Yeah,
have to apply, but you have to say, we want to put in a community garden here. We will be only organic. We won't be using any herbicides or pesticides. Won't be anything dangerous for the pets or the children. We're going to, blah, 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 and put in community gardens. It can be done. It is still being done. But um, again, the representation of Black community gardeners is in many areas fairly low, because people grew up identifying as urban. I don't want to get my hands dirty. I don't want to do that. I've got my
exactly.
nails. I've got my nails. Well, you bought into something that disconnected you from the earth, then you have to think about reconnecting to the earth, because it's not going to work if you don't. You got to maybe put the idea of your life ahead of, and your life of your children and life of your pets ahead of your nails, if you know
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
yeah.
Uh,
And they equate being out in the rural areas as being poor.
as being poor. Oh yeah, I've heard that so many times. I've heard
And
that.
it's not true.
No, no, I've heard that so many times. No, it's not being poor. And there is a sadness in me when I hear, I've worked hard to try to preserve as many magical spells as I can. And most people know me through my work in magic, not through my work in herbology. But so I'll say, well, take this magical bath and whatever it might be for love or whatever, and you're going to take it where the sun rises and throw your water toward the rising sun and bring my love to me. And they go, I've never seen the sun rise. I don't know where the sun rises.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, lady, you know, you,
That,
you, what are you going to do? You're going to hook yourself up to watching the Kardashians? I mean, how is that going to help you? You got to think about your place on the earth. You be a queen. You be someone who the sun rises and you the queen looking at that sunrise. That's what you have to do. You have to claim your space, claim your place, claim your condition of life that you want. And that's magically as well as medically. You know, I
yeah,
know a lot of young people say, I don't need any of those medical herbs because they're not as good as doctor medicines. Well, they may be, and they may not be, depending on what your condition is. If I needed surgery, I would probably go to a surgeon. But there are many, many things that are done at home, not because you're poor, but because they're done with love, they're done with intention, they're done with prayer. To me, just an old-fashioned remedy of liquor, so it could be whiskey or brandy,
yep.
plus lemon, plus honey.
Honey,
Right now, in your family? Did you have a name for that mixture?
hot toddies.
Hot toddy. See, I knew you were going to say hot toddy. Hot toddy is what it's called in the South Central District. But back east, like North Carolina, they often called it Quaker. And this would be Black name for it, because the Quakers who were trying to redeem Black people and get them up north and get them out of slavery, the Quakers used that remedy. And so that remedy is sometimes called Quaker. But
Wait,
most people in Texas and so forth, they would call it hot toddy.
hot
And my husband's family, who is kind of cowboys. I guess they were cowboys. They called it hot toddy too. They lived in Texas and Oklahoma. In my family, however, we used brandy and not whiskey, but it was still made with honey, and there was no name for it other than hot brandy. That's what it was. It was hot brandy.
yeah, hot bread.
Hot brandy, lemon juice, and honey. So, and I was interested when I found the name hot toddy. That was funny to me. But anyway, that kind of a recipe. You don't do that because you're poor. You do it because it's more effective than some of this
Works.
stupid. It works, right? Number two, when you prepare it for your child, let's say it's your child who needs it, or your husband, or your wife, or whoever, you put some prayer into it. You put some love into it. They get the little pillows plumped behind them, right? They get their little cup of hot toddy, and they get put to bed.
Yeah.
And so there's so much more that goes into it than just giving them a cough drop or a pill. And I look at that and I say, this is what humans were meant to do. We are meant to care for each other. We were meant to love one another. And we were meant to be each other's healer and helper. And so home remedies are not just because you're poor, but they're also because you love your family.
Right. That's right. Because there is love, intention,
Mm-hmm.
care that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's right.
much that goes into it.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And on that note, my dear,
Right. Our time is up.
yeah, we've done a 2 hour thing almost.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's just a lot of fun. And
I'm because I have no one to learn from. This is a learning thing for me. And like I said, I've been watching you for years. And not until the show, I said, oh, I wonder if she'll be able to come on because knowledge. And you know what? It's that there is like a root worker association,
Right.
groups and stuff. And people, I think, should get interested in that
Mhm.
and pass that information along. Because one thing, people ought to be mad at the fact that somebody has the nerve to try to uh, castrate the fruits and vegetables going on here so we
Right.
can't grow them. So, what is that telling you? That
Right.
they're going to take eating out of our hands too?
That's right.
And
That's right.
those are things to think about. Pharmaceuticals, we're not going to be able to make our own remedies.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
something to think about.
It sure is. It sure is. And again, I'm just going to say one more thing in closing. These older books that I mentioned, you can still get them online.
Yeah, I'm
And
looking now.
and I will probably in my book HooDoo Urban Root Magic, there's a bibliography of some botany and herbal books. But I have a website, ironwood.org, that is YRONWODE.org. And my husband and I put up bibliographies of good books on different topics. There are books on, how to do numerology, and books on how to do use Ouija boards. Any book on something, we make up these bibliographies or lists of books. So I'll be putting up a botany herbalism list online there at Yippee in the course of the next week. It's very easy for me to do it, and I'm just going to put those up, and that'll be something helpful to everybody to find those books, and you'll know what to look for. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Catherine Yronwode, thank you so much. Thank Nagasiba for me to
Oh, you're so
hook
welcome.
us up. And thank him for having patience with me. I'm learning all of this technology myself. But
Well, you're doing very well.
I, I'm
I'm
doing the
trying,
best I can at my age.
and I'm looking behind you, and I'm seeing the Golden Gate Bridge, and
Oh,
that to me was sort of it's like a trip to see you put that up in California roots.
yeah, yeah. Reminded me of home. I get homesick. I miss the ocean. I
Mm-hmm.
miss I miss 15 minutes I can be at the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
3 hours I can be up in the mountains.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
7 hours I can be in another country. I miss California, but I understand it's not what it was 20 something years ago.
Nope.
Changed. So
Yeah,
I don't I hope,
we're hanging on by our fingernails out here.
yeah, yeah. Um, but I want to thank you. I look forward to you coming back next month,
I'd be glad to.
if not sooner. Um, and I guess that's until then. I hate
All
to
right. Well,
go
thank
out.
you so much, and I really enjoyed this, and thank you so much for getting the word out about life, real life.
Yeah,
All righty,
and
I'll see you next
I'm
month.
I'm gonna post up the book titles, the places and stuff. I don't know how to quite do that yet.
Well, I'll get that together. If you just people go to ironwood.org, it's not up yet, but I'll have it up like I said, within 1 week. It'll be a list of herbalism books. Okay.
Okay. All
All
right.
righty.
Thank you. And
All
you
right.
have a wonderful day. And that
You too.
is
That's it.
our hoodoo for the day, folks.
All right. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.